Good morning, everyone. We are ready to get started. Hello and happy Friday for those of you who are at the end of your work week. Congratulations, you made it. For those of you who are in the service industry and weekends don't apply to you, let's keep going. So, good morning, everybody. Today we are here for the Astro-Babble, which is another round of me reading 8 charts donated by you, my lovely followers. We're going live on Facebook and Instagram, and we're here just to talk about some astro stuff, read some charts, hopefully teach you some things, motivate you a little bit, and that's the gist. If you would like to be a part of the live stream, just submit your birth date, place, and exact birth time to me via private message, we'll add you to the list. But let's go ahead and get started with our first chart. And this morning, chart number 1 belongs to Bradley. Hello, Bradley. How are you? Bradley, we've got some fun stuff in your chart. I'm excited. Good right off the bat. So we have this Aries ascendant, which gives a lot of fire and drive to the personality right off the bat. Mars rules the ascendant, and Mars is up in his exaltation in Capricorn, up in the 10th house of success. Now this means, as well as the fact that Bradley's sun is also in Capricorn in the 10th house, that Bradley is addicted to the limelight and is very much somebody who would pursue fame at all costs. Now, that's not to say that Bradley doesn't deserve it, because putting Mars in an exalted sign, in the exalted sign of Capricorn in the 10th, as well as the Sun in Capricorn in 10th, and Mercury in Capricorn in the 10th, as well as the MC, does make Bradley a natural-born leader. Now, he's a very Capricornian leader, which means that he does tend to be a little bit fiercer, a little bit more stubborn, a little bit more earthy, and because of all of this Capricorn energy in the 10th house in Bradley's chart, there's a lot of that drive that is slow and steady, as opposed to a martial type drive, which is a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more intimidating, and can be somewhat problematic if not channeled correctly. Bradley has channeled his Mars correctly and has put it in the cardinal earth sign of Capricorn, but because so much of his chart revolves around this 10th house idea of work and success, career being so important to him, we have several workaholic themes that may be to Bradley's detriment if he does not counterbalance those with some of the other things that we'll talk about in the chart as well. We do have a lovely moon in Virgo in the 6th. I like to see the moon in the 6th because it does bring a lot of emotional satisfaction with the day-to-day grind. Somebody who can look at a to-do list, look at a task list, look at things to tackle around the office for the day, and really feel an emotional connection to those tasks. But also, it's very easy to remediate a moon in Virgo. Just give them something to do, as opposed to other moon signs that are a little bit more complicated, a little bit more nuanced. Moon in Virgo is basically just really good at receiving the feeling benefit of having everything in its proper place at the right time. Now, the counter to that is if people break routine, if they don't follow the rules, if they are not living to the highest efficiency that is possible, then that moon in Virgo will start to get very upset, especially in the work environment. There is also a tendency for the moon in Virgo in the 6th house to represent gut issues, specifically absorption issues in the small intestine and the liver. Let's see, what else do we want to talk about? Let's talk about Bradley's relationships, because he's done a beautiful thing. There are several beautiful things about Bradley's chart, but one of the most beautiful things, beside the exalted ruler, is he put Saturn in Libra in its exaltation as well, conjoins to degree at 9 degrees with Jupiter in Libra as well, who's applying to that conjunction with Saturn. This is absolutely glorious, Bradley. I'm very excited to see that you do this, because it does represent a partner who is both stern but also exceedingly kind, and somebody who is going to show you all of the nice options that you have at your disposal, somebody who's going to keep an open mind but also know when to get things done. It's not like a it's not like a normal Libra personality. When we look at who you're best partnered with sign-wise, somebody with heavy Libra placements would be excellent. But typical Libra is a little bit indecisive, a little bit more peacemaking, devil's advocate. Let's see it this way. Let's try to be fair. You know, having Saturn in Libra in the 7th, your partner is going to be somebody who really is able to see to the truth of the matter very quickly and push out any emotion and really make that decision, frankly, that agrees with yours, or that is the highest truth, that does not agree with yours, but that you can respect and honor because it is the right thing. There's a lot of beauty and grace in the placements that you've put in your relationship house, but also sternness, the kind of sternness that you yourself can respect, being so driven and focused. Pluto is here in Libra in the 7th, so a marriage later in life is definitely possible, and that's also a unique dynamic in your chart because you've put Venus in Sagittarius ruling the 7th house, so not just later in life, but also marrying a spouse who is foreign, or who you meet abroad. That's going to be that Venus in the 9th house of travel. When we see the 9th house as representing foreigners, putting the ruler of your 7th house there does indicate somebody whose culture is very different from yours coming into the picture, and I think that that's also one of the fun things that helps to break up some of that stubborn Capricorn energy, is somebody who can inject a little bit of flair into your relationship space, and having Venus and Sag in the 9th ruling your 7th is definitely one way to do that. You know, but I think as we come to the end of your chart, Bradley, one of the coolest things and one of the nicest things that I see in your chart is this North Node in Leo in the 5th house of children, ruled by that Sun in Capricorn. And I think that the more you understand that your motivation for being successful is not just for you to be successful, like that's important too, but the North Node in Leo specifically represents you leaving a legacy for your children, and you working towards that family dynamic where you can be the ideal parent, and you can start to not just obtain success for yourself, but obtain success for generations to come, and really pole vault yourself with enough momentum into that successful place, but have that momentum carry through your bloodline and really leave a lasting legacy for the children, biologically or otherwise, that you choose to bring into your picture. Excellent. Thank you, Bradley. I appreciate you donating your chart to science. Let's go ahead and pull up chart number 2. And chart number 2, we have Matthew. Good morning, Matthew. How you doing? So here we have a Virgo ascendant, making Matthew automatically right off the bat very practical, very earthy, but also very detail-oriented. We do have this Pluto and Virgo retrograde in the 1st, which I'm not necessarily a fan of. You know, some of those tendencies of being so detail-oriented, so specific, so nuanced, can be very detrimental to you, Matthew. And I would highly encourage you to understand the toxicity of your nuances and really understand that there's a time and a place for everything, right? However, and details are very, very important, but if they come at the expense of isolating other people, if they come at the expense of making your life more stressful, then maybe you need to work on some of those deeper ingrained habits, because that Virgo conjoined Pluto, that Virgo ascendant conjoined Pluto does really give me this feeling of what you label as efficiency can very, very quickly turn into a poisonous mindset. And how that will turn into a poisonous mindset is definitely through the workflow structure that you've assigned for yourself. You know, we've got this Mercury in Aquarius, which is a very genius placement. You know, your mind works on that Albert Einstein level as an archetype. It's very otherworldly, almost alien to a lot of people, very creative, but to the detriment of certain social standards. Which, I mean, Aquarius is all about breaking the glass ceiling anyway, so it's not like it's a bad thing, but pairing that with your Virgo ascendant, it's just you have a tendency to isolate. You have a tendency to isolate through those nuanced habits, and I'd really want to make sure that you're not pushing people away too hard as you pursue efficiency. But you do have a lovely moon in Cancer in the 11th house of friendships, which does make you very personable. So I like to see that counterbalance. I really enjoy seeing that lovey-dovey, squishy, super sensitive, caring, empathetic moon in the 11th. Like, it really does, like, your friends are very, very much a part of what makes your heart tick. Like, without them, you would definitely be the Tin Man. Like, you would be rusted all over the place. But having that moon in Cancer, does pose unique challenges as well. It is a very sensitive, it is a very watery sign for the moon to be in, especially in her own domicile. You also have the sun in Pisces in the 7th. So all of this water coming up in the chart, that's one of the other ways that these very rigid and detail-oriented placements can backfire, is you use, your Virgo and your Aquarius aspects to really drill down into the things that you can control. But emotions are never within your control, Matthew. We can definitely think we are in control of how we are feeling, but a lot of these activities and a lot of your placements with your sun and your moon both in water signs are very subconscious, are very deep, are very touchy-feely. They're not rational. They can't necessarily be put into a box. Yeah, even techniques that you could use to master, like meditation, like some emotional freedom techniques, or things that you could use in order to work with these watery placements. Again, you're at risk of trying to control the uncontrollable. So there's a fine line in your chart of really making sure that you as a person can channel this Virgo, channel this Mercury and Aquarius in the 6th towards greatest efficiency, but not try to box all of this watery moon, watery sun energy that's in your chart, because it does bring you that flexibility that I think is gorgeous. Let's see. So we have that sun in Pisces in the 7th. You're attracted to somebody who's extremely spiritual, who's very lovey-dovey, who's very physically affectionate, who's very psychic, would be a good way to say it. And I think that will really help to nourish your own intuitive abilities and your own kind of touchy-feely connection with the moon in Cancer. Having a partner who understands how to navigate the watery realm will be very important for you. Let's see, going into the family business, really working towards entrepreneurship. That's a big thing in your chart specifically, because we have this 8th house of work and business. We have Saturn in Aries here, Venus in Aries here, who are both of detriment, and the North Node in Aries here, ruled by Mars and Sag in the 4th. There's a lot of this push from the family in order to be great, in order to be big, in order to do the thing. But we have to understand where that motivation is coming from, and that it's not necessarily going to be easy for you to tap into, but it is going to be one of the major life lessons, is you making a name for yourself and you being self-sufficient and independent. Money is something that's a little bit tricky for you, and when I say a little bit tricky, I mean a lot tricky. So I would highly suggest, as you navigate this idea of becoming a little bit more entrepreneurial and business focused, like, you're very much an ideas guy, Matthew, and I really say that with the best intentions, because I do believe, like, you're a massive ideas guy with that Mercury, Aquarius, and in the 6th, like, you have an eye for efficiency like nobody's business. But when it comes to running a business financially, that's tricky in your chart. Your financial placements are not up to par, and I would really suggest that you work with somebody who's a little bit more financially sound, who can teach you along the way, because you have to know what you're doing monetarily. But from just the general look of your chart in the financial houses, there's a lot of this. There's a lot of this retrograde stuff in the 2nd of finance. There's both Saturn and Venus in signs that they don't like up in the 8th house of business. There's a lot of friction in your finance that we need to have somebody else take care of. Delegating that part of the equation is going to be in your best interest, and it doesn't make you a failure, because you do need to leverage your strengths, and your strengths are definitely in that mental, detail-oriented realm. Channeling that into your work environment while respecting your emotions, preferably through a strong spousal partnership, is going to be excellent for you. And that is all I have to say about Matthew. Thank you, Matthew, for donating your chart. I very, very much appreciate it. Let's take a peek at chart number 3. So we're moving on to Shelby. Shelby, my dear, how are you? We also have a Virgo ascendant with Shelby. The ruler of the chart is Mercury and Leo in the 12th, and we also have Mars and Venus co-present in Virgo in the 1st. So there's a couple nuances that I'd like to bring to your attention, Shelby. And I'm going to say it with as much feeling language as I can, because I think that your Sun in Cancer definitely deserves a little bit of that emotional energy coming forward with this, so that it sinks in. What I'm about to say cannot be rationalized. It cannot be mentally worked with, no matter how much you would like to say it. It has to be felt. And a large portion of that is because we have a detrimented Venus conjoined Mars in the 1st. So Venus does not like to be in Virgo. It's actually the least favorite sign for her to be in, because it opposes her natural exaltation in Pisces. Venus, as goddess of love, abundance, and overall femininity, being in Virgo, the tight-knit sign of hyper-organization, of detail-oriented stuff, of control, rules, and everything must be in its proper place at the right time, does not bode well with the goddess of love and abundance, who floats on flowers with the wind, and is able to, follow her heart and bring abundant love and unconditional love to those who ask for it. You've decided to put that planet in a very controlling sign. And I really think that we need to work on some of your feminine expression. I think that we need to work on some of the ideas of love and abundance that are unconditional. And I think where you're going to tap into that most is going to be a spiritual practice, because that Venus is ruling the 9th house. And I know it can be somewhat difficult to connect with those energies, but having a good relationship with a feminine archetype like the goddess would be very, very nourishing to your chart. I'm less worried about this Mars in Virgo, because Mars in Virgo is actually a very channeled and focused Mars. I like Mars a lot in Virgo, because it's the grain god archetype who's able to plow the fields and really channel his energy appropriately into task-oriented things throughout the day. I enjoy that, as opposed to Venus, who needs to be a little bit more flowing, needs to be a little bit more non-controlled, and you've stuck her in a controlled sign. So the devil is in the details for you, and in this case the devil is not working in your favor, Shelby. But having Mars and Venus co-present in the 1st house of self does also bring gender issues to the equation, because we have Mars, the sign of masculinity, Venus, the sign of femininity, co-present almost to degree in conjunction. There's a lot of this questioning of the masculine feminine principle. What is gender? What is sexuality? What is this principle of hot, fiery, active yang, and cool, nourishing, receptive yin? And how do we balance those two expressions in the chart? Unfortunately, it seems like the Venusian yin side is losing the battle, so we kind of need to bolster her up and get some nourishment into that space. Another aspect that I wanted to bring to your attention is the idea of your chart ruler, Mercury, because your ascendant is in Virgo, and Mercury rules Virgo. Your Mercury is in Leo in the 12th house, co-present with Jupiter in the 12th. And I know that there's this idea of fame shaming, and the idea of you being in the spotlight, and that being one of your worst fears, but also one of your greatest destinies. It's really interesting when we see this Mercury not just in the 12th house of hidden enemies, but also ruling the 10th house of success. Like, there is this idea of you delving into the 12th house, which is a very private, very personal, very healing-oriented house. It's where a lot of our fears are kept. It's where a lot of our subconscious activity plays out. And you've decided to delve into that space head-on and put Jupiter there in Leo, and then to have that Mercury ruler of the chart rule the 10th house of fame and success in business. There's a lot of this idea of stepping into the spotlight with things that are not supposed to be in the spotlight, and bringing to light things that are perpetually dark. And that being a big fear for you, but also where you're supposed to be navigating. So I would highly suggest even working from a therapeutic perspective in psychology, in in the idea of developing a persona, in the idea of working through psychological trauma and the nuances of the healing process, I think you'd be uniquely qualified to kind of hold the lamp for other people in that department. We've got a killer work ethic with Saturn in Aquarius retrograde at 3 degrees in the 6th house. You know, there is this procrastination principle, but once you get to a project, you know, there's an eye for detail, there's an eye for talent, which I find refreshing. We might just need to petition Saturn a little bit to kick your butt and get some of the projects done to begin with. Moon in Sagittarius in the 4th, you know, home is definitely where you find a lot of that creative energy. In fact, if you were to go into some sort of healing profession or work in like psychology or something of that nature, I would highly suggest you have a home-based practice, because the moon is in the 4th house of family. You know, there is this recharge that's needed in groups, but not necessarily social groups. Like the moon in Cancer, or the sun in Cancer in the 11th really makes you the mom friend. Yeah, the moon in Sagittarius in the 4th really requires you to recharge with a close-knit group of people in a home environment. So it's not necessarily social, but it is the idea that you spending time within the 4 walls of your choosing and making that your sacred space also helps to unlock not just your healing process, but also the healing process of others. So leveraging your chart from a therapeutic perspective in that way as well. Let's see. What else do we want to talk about? You potentially using art as a therapy as well, because that Saturn in Aquarius is ruling your North Node in the 5th. Working with children, because of the North Node in Capricorn in the 5th house of children as well, that would be an excellent expression of your 6th, 5th connection. Where else do we want to go? Let's leave a final note about relationships. You know, I think if your tendency to help people walk through the shadows of their experience is not properly expressed, then you're going to be addicted to people who are broken. And that's one of the key hallmarks of having Pisces on the 7th house of relationships, ruled by your Jupiter in Leo in the 12th house of karmic healing, is you're constantly attracting people who you partner with that are broken. And the way that we channel that, and the way that we work with that, because all of the tendencies in the chart need to be expressed, but how we express them is up to us, right? So if you were to work in a healing profession and help people with their problems in some way, shape, or form, and work with walking people through that healing process on your own time, in your work, etc., then that Pisces would transform in the 7th house and really be somebody who's actually very involved with their own internal development, you know, attracting somebody who's actually on the ball, who's going to therapy, who's already very much ingrained, has very much ingrained in themselves the importance of self-care and self-work. Otherwise, you're going to become that self-care and that self-work for them, and that's not necessarily a healthy foundation to build your relationship on. We can definitely exercise those therapeutic placements in a healthier way. Cool. Thank you, Shelby, my dear. I hope that you have a fantastic Friday. Yes. Okay. We have a couple comments. He's a financial coach, advisor, and super organized with finance. Yep. Perfect. Yay, made it. So glad that you enjoyed it. Yeah, definitely watch the replay if you just caught the end of it, because I was speaking a couple minutes before you jumped on. Okay, now we're going to Stephanie. Stephanie, how are you? Okay, Stephanie. Let's talk about you. Oh, Capricorn stellium. What? Goodness. Crazy. Not that you're actually crazy, Stephanie. That's just me. Lord have mercy. Okay. So we have a very nuanced chart with you, Stephanie, and I'm going to say nuanced because we need to understand some very specific themes, because you are quite the individual, my dear. And I say that with much love and appreciation for all of the placements in your chart. first and foremost, your sun is in Pisces, and it's in the third house of writing, teaching, and speaking. However, that's not the strongest aspect of your chart. Creative writing and teaching and speaking and working with children, yes, that is a big part of your chart. You would be an excellent teacher. However, one of the things that I'd really like to draw your attention to is this Capricorn stellium in the first. So we have Uranus, Saturn, Neptune, Mars, and Mars conjunct the ascendant at 12 degrees in Capricorn. This Capricorn stellium brings a certain level of hardness, a certain level of stubbornness, a certain level of, especially in earlier years, a sense of withdrawal, a sense of frailty, a sense of needing to toughen up in the earlier years. Now, as you started to progress through life and you started to develop those calluses, you started to develop that classic Capricornian armor. And again, the idea that you're a Pisces does bring a certain element of softness, but you have so much Capricorn in your chart, it's absolutely ridiculous. I would highly suggest you consider yourself more a Capricorn than you do a Pisces, because Pisces never really resonated with you besides the creative stuff. You're too hard for that. And there is this piece of you that's ready to go to war and ready to go to battle and ready to treat everything like a competition and a destiny and as if your life depended on it. But then you have these softer placements that are kind of on the surface, but they're easily scratched away. They don't necessarily make up you as a person. Instead, we have this really beautiful, exalted Mars and Capricorn conjunct the ascendant. This definitely makes you a war goddess. You're very much associated with Durga, with Athena, with the idea of you charging into these projects that you choose to tackle with a fierceness, with a creativity, with a blessed eye would be a good way to say it. Whenever we find an exalted planet very close to the ascendant, it's the idea of the God touched being very present, and having that exalted Mars, planet of war, it really does give you that kind of general feel to you. And to counterbalance that with all of the softness of your sun, and have Jupiter and Venus in her own sign of Taurus, both benefics in the fifth house of children and creativity. There's so much lusciousness in your chart to counterbalance the earthiness of the first house. I really like that. I really like that a lot. But we need to give equal time to that fierceness and that kind of lovey-dovey, mushy-gushy side to you. So these two sides, they're not necessarily at war, but they do have the potential for some conflict, because they both require different things to feed them. Right? This Venus and Taurus in the fifth house of children, sexuality, creativity, parenting, it makes you a great parent. You definitely have a way with children. But at the same time, you take no shit. The idea of all these very stern Capricorn placements in your first house, and that Mars coming forward really says, look, I love you, but there's work to be done. There's a battle to be won. There are swords that need forging. We need to do the things, and that's definitely a side of you that I think is really, really important to acknowledge. Let's see, what else do we want to talk about? Let's talk about. We've got this Mercury in Aquarius in the second house. Your understanding of money is hilarious, because it's very foreign to you, but also you're surprisingly good at it. Mercury is that liminal sign in Aquarius, that genius archetype that's a little bit airy, but also hyper focused. Your relationship with money, I think, is absolutely adorable. And I think you can wrap your head around it. So I'm not worried about that aspect of life too much, because that seems to be working in your favor. I think we need to talk about this moon in Sagittarius in the 12th, because when things don't go right, a moon in Sag in the 12th, which is normally a very joyous moon, it's normally a moon that is very spunky, that is very firecrackery, that is very expressive, but also humorous. and charismatic. You putting the moon in the 12th, though, the 12th of hidden enemies, the 12th of karmic healing, the 12th of deeper, darker concepts that are muddier and not necessarily as helpful to a moon who's about to square your sun as well. There's a lot of this idea of you feeling like a victim of your emotions being stolen from you, your feelings being a little bit too temperamental, and your emotional state being somewhat volatile. I use the word firecracker with Sagittarius because it's that mutable fire sign. It's that explosion, that's really, really pretty for a couple seconds, but then it goes away. And that mutability, that changeability of your moon, can be a little bit dangerous in the 12th house. It makes your moon extremely empathetic, but almost to a fault. Your moon is a little bit too mutable. And I think that when you find... Now, let me preface it with this. You have enough momentum in your chart with other personality aspects, other personality constructs, that you could go for miles without realizing that you have an emotional flat tire, right? But I want you to really understand that your emotional flat tires are very, very important. And the reason for that is because the moon in Sagittarius, the humor, the spunkiness, the creativity of that moon in Sag really does grease the armor, and without it, you start to rust. And there's this idea of your armor becoming very squeaky, faulty, and abrasive, also way too sharp. If that moon goes and stays flat and stays succumbed for too long. So we really need to make sure that even though you could keep going, that you force yourself to take some breaks, check in emotionally, and really start to nourish the heart space, because that's the part of the chart that I think is, frankly, the weakest and most susceptible to the influences of others that are not necessarily in line with your highest good. Yeah, let's say that. Okay. Excellent, Stephanie. Thank you so much for donating your chart. I appreciate you very much. Lol, sister, of course she does. Right, of course. I love to see family in the charts. It's always fun to read for mothers, daughters, sisters, brothers, aunts, uncles. Like, get the whole family in. Why don't we? So we are halfway through the live stream. If you would like to get your friends, your family on here, always with their consent, please. Do not give me birth times, birth dates, places, and times if somebody does not want their chart featured on social media, because this is a very public thing that we're doing. But if you or somebody you know would like to be on the live stream, just private message me their birth date, place, and exact birth time, and I will add them to the list. Also, if you would like to schedule a private consultation with me, if you'd like to work one-on-one, we could talk about astro stuff, we could talk about remediation, we could talk about rituals in order to improve the life from a magical perspective. We can do all of that one-on-one. Just go to my website, ScorpioRisingAstrology.com, and we'll talk about it. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to chart number 5. Oop, that's the calculator. I need to go back to my Word documents. Okay. Hexariot, my dear, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, from Instagram. Let's take a peek at your chart. So here we have Pluto in Scorpio, Ascendant in Scorpio, and Venus in Scorpio, all in the first house of self. We also have Mars in Aries ruling the 6th. I can see why you follow me on Instagram, because this is very similar to my chart, except I don't have a detrimented Venus in the first house, or a fallen Venus in the first house. That Venus is also ruling and opposing Jupiter in Taurus retrograde. That's somewhat problematic, with a moon in Libra as well, ruled by that. Okay, I'm seeing a theme. A thema mundi, for those of you who are astrologers and get that joke, thank you. But Saturn's in Capricorn, Neptune, Uranus in Capricorn, really fun. Okay, so we've got a lot to unpack here, my dear. First and foremost, having Pluto conjunct the ascendant, even though they're 2 degrees and separating, it's still co-present with the ascendant. The idea of you being very attached to the underworld, and the idea of darkness and shadow, befriending those qualities of the supernatural, of the occult, the literal hidden principles of the world, going to be very, very much a part of who you are as a person. Blessed by Hades, you are. And that's anybody who has Pluto very close to the ascendant in Scorpio. It's just, everybody in our generation has Pluto in Scorpio. It's a long transit, yeah. But to choose to have Pluto in Scorpio so close to the ascendant, that's a very specific choice you've made, and it really does give you great depths of power, great depths of strength. But for the first 50 years of life, it really is an untapped and slightly toxic shadow side of you that needs to be fermented and worked with over time, yeah. Unfortunately, having Venus in Scorpio here in the first does make you prone to the victim mentality. Venus in Scorpio, Venus as the archetypal queen, yeah, of the kingdom, she is ostracized from her kingdom in Scorpio. She is opposing her natural rulership in Taurus. She is kicked out of her own domain, and she is living outside in the woods somewhere, being very unqueenly. Yeah, she then becomes the queen of the sewers, the queen of the shadow places, the queen of the outskirts. And, it's very much that, if we were to think of Pluto in Scorpio as Hades, we could then think of Venus in Scorpio as the abduction and rape of Persephone. Those 2 archetypes surrounding your ascendant really does bring a certain element of that myth very present into your experience and into your life. So I would highly recommend that you work to not just understand and partner with, but also remediate some of that compromised Venus energy. And one of the ways that you'll actually do this is through choosing a partner. Because you've put the ruler of your 7th in your 1st, you identify very, very strongly with having somebody in your life at all times, and that person is going to take on the qualities of your Jupiter in Taurus retrograde that you've put into your 7th house of relationships. Now, aside from finding somebody who's stable, who's emotionally consistent, who's very normal, yeah, but also very physically supportive, very touchy-feely, very much about the grounded nature of life and reality. Also somebody who's a little bit physically bigger or stockier because of that Jupiter nature. You're basically looking for a rock. You're looking for somebody to weigh you down, to be consistent, because you have a certain element of that inconsistency in your chart that needs to be grounded out, especially with this moon in Libra down in the 4th. Like, it's the indecisions that panic you the most, especially when it comes to family. Putting somebody in your life who's able to be a consistent source of emotional stability, like that's massive for you on so many levels. And I think if you don't already have that experience queued up, we need to recognize the importance of that for you. Putting the ruler of the chart in Aries in the 6th really does, and I'm speaking from personal experience here because I also have Scorpio ascendant conjunct Pluto with Mars and Aries in the 6th ruling the chart. Really does attract you to the health and healing professions. It's a very combat medic placement. Mars, that god of war, in his home sign of Aries, which is known for battle and impulsiveness, in the 6th house of healing. It really does, like, your goal is to fix people. Like, that's very much one of the aspects of your chart that I think you understand pretty well at this point, especially with that Mars being in such close sextile to the moon in Libra. Like, you having a very healing nature to you and needing on a very visceral level to engage in other people's healing processes. Like, that's a very big thing for you. So I would encourage you to get some sort of job in the healing professions, or work very closely with animals, especially aggressive animals or animals that compete for sport. You would be very excellent at taking care of them, not just because of your intuitive Scorpio nature, but also because, Mars and Aries in the 6th is that battle or combat-oriented placement that really does bring a lot of that heat, that fire that you would be uniquely qualified to work with. there's a lot of traveling happening in the family, a lot of spirituality happening in the family. Whenever we see the ruler of the ninth in the fourth, it's somebody who tends to adopt the spiritual practices of their parents. But also that fourth house of family and that ninth house of travel, very, very connected. So we have this idea of the fairness and the balance and the loveliness of Libra, but also the idea of there's this spiritual and travel-oriented tint to the family, which can somewhat add unpredictability to the equation, because it's not like you're living with an actual family to a certain degree. It's like you're adopting practices and methods which will serve you later on, but they may not necessarily be for your highest good. They were kind of stamped on you at birth on a soul level. So whether or not you choose to re-tattoo yourself is going to be up to you. We do have the Sun in Sag, as well as Mercury in Sag in the second. There's a little bit of an impulsive spending issue, especially because Mercury in Sag does not necessarily deal with money well. Mercury in Sag, Mercury as a planet that is known for money and ruling the 8th house of business, there is a financial component here, but oh, I'm sorry, yes, Moon in Aquarius. You're right. I'm blind this morning. Libra, not... it's not Libra, it's Aquarius. You are absolutely right. My eyes I'm just squinting. But yes, you are correct. Moon in Aquarius. Everybody who is first house Scorpio has Moon in Aquarius, not Libra. That was a brain fart on my part. Anyway, so back to the money stuff. So money stuff, when we look at Mercury in Sagittarius, Mercury is that planet of money, Sagittarius as that kind of impulsive firecrackery sign that we talked about earlier, Sun in Sagittarius as well, and Mercury ruling the 8th house of business. I think money is something that may be a little bit fast and loose in the natal chart. There may be some impulsive spending habits, but if channeled correctly, there is a respect and a financial gain that can be had. We just need to make sure that some of that fire when it comes to finances, some of that excitement, some of that over-exuberant energy financially does get channeled correctly, because that Sun is combusting Mercury as well. It is a little bit too close for comfort, which can bring, again, some more of that fast and loose energy into the financial house, which should be a little bit more stable. Now, because you do have Jupiter and Taurus retrograde in the 7th, ruling that second house, the idea of putting your ruler of finance into the 7th house of relationships, turning over your financial resources to a spouse would definitely be something that I think may solidify your finances. But again, the idea of you needing to exercise some of those placements and use finances to a certain extent to brighten your ego, to lift your mind. The shopping spree aspect is definitely in the chart, but to surrender that into a partner for safekeeping is also part of the strategy. So maybe have a little fun money on the side, but definitely let the rock be the gravitational force that it is in terms of a spouse. I'm so glad that you enjoyed my interpretation of your chart, my dear. There is also a great potential for children in the chart, because Jupiter, the ruler of your 5th house of children, is in the 7th house of relationships. I always like to see that. And then also the North Node being in Pisces in the 5th, like one of the things that you're actually striving towards this go around is to learn how to be a good parent, because that Moon in Aquarius, not Moon in Libra, Moon in Aquarius, in the 4th does bring a little bit of that chaos when it's connected to the 9th, and you bringing stability and a little bit more of the intuitive parenting vibe to the equation. I think that's part of the destiny of the chart. Okay, let's go ahead. Oh, we got more comments. Let's look at those real quick. So we've got Stephanie. I'm so glad you enjoyed it, Stephanie. Thank you so much for tuning on. She is in a state of shock, I guess. Okay, so that's my Solar Fire software. We need to pull up the Word document. We're moving on to SJ. SJ, my dear, how are you? We have a very lovely friend in common. Cheers. SJ, my dear, my darling, we have some things that we need to talk about. And I'm going to do my best in order to talk about them with as much grace as possible. But girl, I know you know what I'm talking about. We have some things that we need to discuss. You've put your Sun in Scorpio, your Pluto in Scorpio, your Ascendant in Scorpio, your Venus in Scorpio, also retrograde, as well as your Mercury in Scorpio. That is a stellium in Scorpio that I think needs to be unpacked very gracefully because it tends to be rather sticky. Now, the ruler of your chart is Mars in Aquarius in the 4th, which does put a good grounded family orientation into the chart. You finding a group of people to spend your life with and to be connected to via blood is going to be very, very important in your life, especially because they will also be very financially important to you. Putting Mars, the ruler of your chart in Aquarius, ruled by Saturn and Sag in the 2nd house of wealth, does connect family and finance. And there is always going to be some sort of interplay between those two areas of your life. They will always be connected. Money giving and taking from the people who you've chosen to identify with as the fam. But I'm a little bit more concerned about this Venus in Scorpio. We've already talked about Venus in Scorpio on the live streams, but this time she is also retrograde. She is also going backwards, and she's not close to the ascendant, separated by 7 degrees, but will be close to the ascendant via progression. I think the thing that we need to understand is, again, back to that idea of Hades Persephone, back to the idea of you identifying with the victim, the queen who is ostracized, that idea of Venus being retrograde in the chart, really creating a lot of, even from a physical perspective, like feminine problems in the reproductive aspect, because we don't like to see Mercury in Scorpio and a retrograde Venus in Scorpio plus the Sun in the ascendant. Like, that's a lot happening in the colon, the bladder, the reproductive, and the sinus areas. Like, from a medical astrology perspective, that's a lot to put into that one body system. So not necessarily a fan of that. We need to unpack that really, really well. You need to embrace your darkness, but understand that your darkness does not make you bad or evil. You are a natural-born shaman. I think you traversing the underworld just for fun is a thing. But then also, like, respect the idea that you breathe a different kind of oxygen than most people. And just because they don't understand it does not make you wrong or bad. And instead, you also need to remind yourself that your exile in Scorpio, the idea of you constantly surrounding yourself with aspects that feel almost physically uncomfortable, not just to you but other people, that is part of the journey, and you unpacking that very slowly, very carefully, very systematically, I think will be an interesting dynamic for you to explore. You've already learned how to do that work. Like, you know about 12th house topics with Venus ruling the South Node in the 12th. Like, I get it. But your challenge will be to actually activate those themes, to understand who your enemies are, and to also understand what it is that you need to tackle in order to make progress. Action is the theme of your life this go around. In previous lives, you were the peacekeeper, you were the ideal person that people went to in order to solve an argument. This time you've been hurt, you've been damaged, and it's time to flip into the action-oriented sign of Aries via this North Node in the 6th. I really would like you to command and conquer this go around, as opposed to play it safe. Moon in Leo is very, very strong in the 10th. I enjoy that very much. Really does mean that you're comfortable on a public platform. I like that. I like that a lot. You're attracted to people in that same kind of weirdo group with with Mercury in Scorpio, Mercury, planet of the mind, in Scorpio, that deep, dark underworld, piercing spiritual energy, which is ruling the 11th house of friendships. You're constantly surrounded by this tribe of ghouls and goblins, and I love that for you, because it does nourish a lot of those scorpionic tendencies, and creating a tribe of people who, like I said, breathe your same oxygen. That's going to be super important going forward. We have finance stuff is interesting. We also have Sag here. Jupiter and Pisces retrograde in the 5th. That's an interesting placement. The creativity is there, but there is also the tendency for procrastination, very heavy procrastination, especially for finance. What I'd really encourage you to do, as I'm seeing this chart, don't let money get in the way of your dreams. That's a good kind of encapsulation of what this placement really speaks to me about. Because if you like, as a creator, or if you like, especially because 5th house rules children, if you would like to be a parent, there are going to be people, places, things in your life who are always going to be able to support you, but you don't necessarily, like, you can do it on a budget. You can really make things work in your favor. You just have to exercise the Saturn and Sag in your 2nd house and get a little bit creative with the Uranus and Sag in the 2nd, and say we need to tighten the belts, we need to do things that are a little bit unconventional, but we can do it. Like, as an art idea, like, if you can't buy the traditional supplies to make it through art school, dumpster dive. Like, go get into the nasty places, go collect shells on the beach, do things that are free but slightly gross that nobody really likes to think of, but that you're uniquely qualified to do with all this Scorpio energy. Like, you're uniquely qualified to make art out of dumpster trash. Like, it's totally a thing for you. And I think if you allow yourself to be a little bit more creative and a little bit less bound with things that you think are outside of your control, there will be a lot more of that ability to exercise the North Node in Aries, and pump that fiery energy into the chart, which it so needs this time around to counterbalance the deep, the dark, the mysterious, the watery. Okay, cool. Thank you, SJ. I very much appreciate you donating your chart. Let's go ahead and move on to our 7th chart, which is going to be Julie. Julie. Okay, Julie, let's take a peek. So we also have a Scorpio ascendant here, conjunct Neptune in Scorpio retrograde. Okay, Julie, so just FYI, from a medical perspective, whenever we see Neptune conjunct the ascendant, you are hypersensitive to chemicals, in all ways, shapes, and forms. That includes medications, that includes alcohols, that includes sugars, that includes caffeine. Your body just immediately injects it into the system and is hyperabsorbent and doesn't have the boundaries that it needs. And because of that, it definitely makes you a little bit more prone to things like addictive tendencies, but also the idea of, like, you need to take half an Advil, whereas other people need to pop like 4. Like, your body is just so super sensitive, and that needs to be understood right off the bat. Boop, boop, boop. And then we go to the moon in Aries in the 6th. There is a really nice conqueror energy with the moon in Aries in the 6th being ruled by that Mars in Virgo in the 11th. I think that, it brings out a lot of the natural leadership qualities that you have. I think it brings out a lot of the fighter in you, for sure. I think it does allow you to push forward, to activate, to be strong emotionally. I like it, and also a really hard worker. But then we have this mutual reception between and trine, or no, just kidding, just mutual reception between Mercury and Taurus, Venus and Gemini, co-present with Sun in Gemini, Jupiter in Gemini, and North Node Gemini in the 8th. The 8th house is a really interesting place, especially because it is the house of business, taxes, death, estates. And then the mutual reception between Venus and Mercury in the 7th. especially if you were to work with divorce law, if you were to work with couples in any way, shape, or form, would be an excellent move for you, especially with Sagittarius being on your second, ruled by Jupiter in the 8th. You could definitely make a career out of anything that touches death and dying. Yeah, you're just uniquely qualified to tie in aspects of the 7th house of relationships and the 8th house of death, taxes, estates, and business. A lot of prominent 8th house people will often go on to become lawyers, will often go on to become people who manage other people's money. And the idea of specifically working with people who are, again, like as an example, somebody dies and you're working with other people's stuff to sell the estate, to make sure that everybody's happy and amicable. You're also helping other people sell their homes. You're conducting funeral arrangements. Like you're that person that's able to manage other people's affairs for them. Especially with a Gemini aspect to that, ruled by Mercury in the 7th. Going into business with a partner, definitely something that your chart speaks about very highly. And you also being very famous as like a fixer. Yeah, that sun ruling the 10th house of success from the 8th house of business. I think just the more you strike that independence, the more you leverage your own strengths. It's just going to be really good for you overall. And it's not really about the money, it's about the affluence. Yeah. It can be kind of difficult to put the South Node in Sagittarius, as well as you're up for a South Node conjunction over the next year or so. So that's going to be very clarifying for you as you start to realize, like, it's not necessarily about my money, it's about other people's money and resources and how I can leverage those things. Saturn and Pisces in the 5th. Interesting boundary issues with children. Ruled by Jupiter in the 8th. This is actually something that I don't like to see. So when we see Jupiter ruling the 5th, but Saturn is here as well, there is this idea of the 8th house being a house of death and 5th house being a house of children. Saturn tends to be rather restrictive. Pisces, that sign of water. So one of the interpretations that's classically written about with this formation is the idea of children dying early via drowning. And that's something that's on a lower expression. Every planetary expression has lower and higher volumes and octaves. And so when we look at lower expressions of this, it really does indicate, harm coming to children at an early age due to water. However, the idea of when we look at that from a positive perspective, we also see a great strength and skill set that can be cultivated artistically with children if they are put into practice at an early age. And when I say early age, I mean like as soon as they're able to touch the piano, you get them lessons, and encourage their artistic expression through the rigorous Saturnian quality of practice. What else? Let's talk about the Mercury in Taurus. Partners tend to be rather stubborn for you, but they also will be very consistent. You like somebody who's intellectual, you like somebody who you can do good business with, somebody who's naturally a friend, but one of the things that they do tend to get on your case about is just the rituals, the daily tasks, the procedures, the things that are a little bit more Taurian in nature. But I think that's it. The chart's kind of going cold for me. So thank you, Julie. I appreciate you donating your chart as well to the live stream. We've got one more chart to do and just a couple minutes to do it, so Instagram's probably going to cut me off. So if you're still watching, check the YouTube channel for the last reading, and likewise on Facebook, the replay will be in both places. Let's talk about Lisa, our last chart. So we have a Virgo ascendant, Mars in Virgo as well. Seems to be a theme today, the Mars in Virgo, but Mars in Virgo very close to the ascendant in the 1st. I like that. Chart ruler is Mercury. Mercury is co-present in combustion with the Sun in Cancer. That's tricky. Very tricky. Tricky. The trickier The trickier your chart, the more I look at it, Lisa. Everything seems so simple, and yet it is not. Okay, so let's talk about some of these placements, Lisa. So naturally, I would say that Mars, that action-oriented fiery planet, in Virgo, the productive grain-oriented sign, definitely does give you this farmer energy to you, where you're able to cultivate, able to grow, able to put in a hard day's work and effort over time. I enjoy that. I enjoy that energy. However, there are several things that I need to warn you about. The first is that you have that Mars ruling the moon in Aries in the 8th. It does make you a little bit of a workaholic. Paired with the Sun and Mercury in Cancer in the 11th, you tend to compromise your boundaries for friends. And this is a difficult kind of triad to have in a chart for a couple different reasons, especially because you tend to give your money to people who don't deserve it. And that's not to say that it doesn't help you, but it just doesn't necessarily help them in the long run. I think when we look at your chart, the idea to serve, the idea to give of oneself, the idea to effort, and to really be a productive member of society, but also a compassionate member of society. That's so strong and such a noble would be a good way to describe your chart. Noble effort, yeah? Not always appropriate, Lisa, not always appropriate. I think you need to learn, or hopefully you have learned over time, that your energy is not always required. And even if it is wanted, it is not always needed, right? There's a difference. And I think with this Sun in Cancer, you really want to take care of your friends, and this Mercury in Cancer that's compromised via combustion really does tell you all the time that if I just love them hard enough, if I just give more, everything will be okay. Unfortunately, my dear, it will not. It will not. And it's not going to win you any favors, because when we look at this overgiving tendency in the chart, we really need to be very specific about where that goes, and really to make sure that you're able to identify the skill of identifying people who are truly in need of your energy and are worthy and deserving of it. Yeah? Yeah? And here's a little bit of wisdom and lesson that I would like to drop on you. So get ready. You're about to get a supernatural suplex. People will pay for what they respect. So if they're not willing to pay you, or exchange with you, or return the favor, or go toe-to-toe with you and match the energy that you're giving them, they don't appreciate you. It's just how it is. People will be over the moon, constantly giving you favors and gifts and referrals and talking you up and giving you the support that you need if they honestly respect your work. But if they're not making the attempt to reach out, if they're not doing some of the heavy lifting for you, if they're not going above and beyond what you know they should in order to do things to compensate you for your time, even if that's not financial, yeah, then your time is being wasted. Your time is being wasted on them, yeah? And you need to forgive yourself as well as them and move on. Because there is such a nurturer archetype. You have this Venus in Leo, Saturn in Leo in the 12th. It's this torchbearer person who's really charging into the uncomfortable places and able to pull people out. But if they're staying there for a reason, yeah, if their healing journey isn't over, and especially if they're not willing to make the effort to come with you, yeah, then it's not your job. And frankly, it can be very detrimental to their process, their vision, their destiny as well, to remove them from that incubator if they're not ready to come out. That's an analogy that I really like to use with my students, is, some people seem like they're going through healing crisis and that they're going through the toughest time of their lives when really they're cooking, and they're experiencing growing pains, yeah? But if you crack that egg and try to save somebody before they're done growing, then they'll probably end up dying, because that the nutrients were inside of the egg. And yes, you could mama bird them and you could feed them and you could do all the things, but that takes way more energy than if you just let them rest and use their own process to fix themselves. So there's a lot there that needs to be unpacked, for sure. You identify very strongly with the role of the writer, and I would highly encourage you to do writing, teaching, speaking down the road, because this North Node in Scorpio in the third, as well as Uranus in Scorpio in the third, does make you very uniquely qualified to do that fascinating work of teaching, of writing, of speaking to other people about some of those uncomfortable topics that you're uniquely qualified to navigate. And I think you know how to sugarcoat things, and I think you know how to really let people down easily. You learn that from your family. Your Neptune in Sagittarius retrograde in the fourth, like you learned how to let people down gently, and to just, oh, bless your heart, sugar, you'll be all right, and walk away with a compliment. And I think that's definitely one of the things that you'll need to learn how to do. But if you wanted a little bit of direction, if you wanted a little bit of karma points and guidance, we really need to take a little bit more of an active role in the teaching and educating portion of your chart, instead of just kind of surviving or making do, especially if you feel like you're getting caught up in trying to help other people, but let them buy the book. Yeah, let them buy the book. Let them put their money where their mouth is in terms of their own healing process, because sometimes people just want to talk. And that's okay, but you've got bigger fish to fry. Okay. Thank you, Lisa, for donating your chart to science. Okie dokie, that is the last chart, and we're an hour and 5 minutes in. Thank you for joining me for another round of the Astro-Babble. I very, very much appreciate it. Everything is always recorded, and you can find it on the YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search in ScorpioRisingAstrology.com, which is my website. The channel will pop up. You'll be able to see not just these Astro-Babbles, but also my weekly forecasts that I do astrologically. If you'd like to learn what the stars have in store for your week in advance, you can always watch that. If you'd like to work one-on-one and would like to be a little bit more in-depth with your chart, you can always schedule a consult by visiting my website, ScorpioRisingAstrology.com, or if you'd like to learn astrology, I also have pre-recorded downloadable classes if you have the itch to study the stars with me. But that is it for our week, and we will be moving into the weekend, and I will pick up our Astro-Babble on Monday, and until then, may the stars be ever in your favor.